Good morning. Welcome to this webinar that Cyberforts are putting on for you today. I'm just going to ask George if you could unmute yourself for a second and if you would like to introduce this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by saying I hope everyone is still remaining safe and well during this time. I hope yourself and all your families are well. And you actually managed to enjoy the bank holiday weekend despite the situation. So yeah, just to sort of set the scene really, the reason why we've arranged this Mind for the Gap webinar. As you're all aware, we're obviously finding ourselves in sort of difficult times at the minute. And whilst every business is going through this, us at Cyberforts still appreciate and still understand that there is going to be an element of cyber risk. And the cyber criminals are certainly not going to be resting whilst we're working from home. So yeah, the reason we've arranged this is that Gary Hibbard's going to walk us through to let us know some of the tips and tricks around staying cyber secure during this sort of vulnerable time that we find ourselves in. So yeah, that's the reason. I'll hand back to yourself, Gary.
Thank you. That's appreciated, George. Thank you. Yeah, we've got quite a lot to cover, so we'll get started. The agenda itself, we're going to cover who is being targeted. We are going to talk about who the bad guys are and also who they are not, to try and smash some misconceptions about who the cyber criminals and the people who are out there to do us ill actually are and who they're not. We are going to hopefully give you some real actionable steps that you can follow today, and we're going to talk about closing gaps and why that's so important as well throughout this presentation. As I said, it would be great to have your questions, so feel free to send those over. So I think before we get into the actual detail of this, I think it's probably helpful just to have a bit of an introduction to who I am, who's talking to you today. So George said, I'm Gary Hibbard. I have been doing cybersecurity for quite a long time. I've been in IT for 35 years. Just when I was a young boy, first started out in cybersecurity. It wasn't called cybersecurity back then. I just knew that I wanted to use these new wonderful tools, these computers. Principally, I wanted to be a hacker. I saw a film that inspired me to learn all about computer programming and learn all about computers. So that's what I did. And for 20 of those 35 years, I have very much focused on information governance, cybersecurity, data protection. It's something that I've been involved with in terms of running companies. So I've been a managing director, so I understand the constraints of business. I understand the pressures placed upon you. I've also been a CISO, so I know what it's like to be the Chief Information Security Officer. And of course, I'm a consultant. So I am a fee-earning consultant. So it's very much about hands on the keyboard, boots on the ground. We're all about pragmatism, about helping people. I'm a published author in business continuity and crisis management. A researcher in terms of cybercrime and cyber psychology. And indeed, in my spare time, I'm working with a number of PhD students on various different topics, everything from cyber trauma through to the evolution of crime and artificial criminal intelligence, ACI as it's commonly called. I'm a cybersecurity specialist. That's the best way I can put it. I'm not a real fan of calling myself a cybersecurity expert because this is something that we are all learning together. It's just that I've focused on this topic for a very long time. And I can see the benefits of technology. So I'm not here to try and scare you and turn you off technology by any stretch of the imagination. I think, you know, it has great power. It connects us clearly during these times that we're currently in a disconnected world. You know, we need technology to be able to, you know, wrap our virtual arms around each other and our businesses. but we need to do that in a very safe and secure way, because there's lots of benefits with technology, but there's also lots of downsides too. But before we go into talking about particular steps and such, and pragmatic tools that we can implement, the one thing I am going to say is that I think, you know, we are suffering from one of the biggest problem that we suffer from at this point in time, and have for some time in actual fact, is complacency. In fact, I think complacency is the biggest risk that we face. And I often say to people that our ignorance and our lack of knowledge is being used against us, and it's the kind of thing that the cyber criminals are looking for. They hope that we are ignorant and that we don't know much about cybersecurity, or we're not paying attention. So complacency and lack of knowledge are really working against us. So I'd like to thank you all for joining this webinar from the outset, because by being on this webinar, you've already taken a massive step forward in helping to protect you, your families, and your businesses against the cyber criminals. But one of the first questions we've got to ask really is who is being targeted? So that's the first agenda item. Well, the truth is we're all potential targets, irrespective of which sector we're in. Doesn't matter who you are. Anyone can suffer a data breach or become a victim of cybercrime. Everyone from, of course, the government, large businesses, small businesses, charities, and you yourselves. We are all potential victims of cybercrime or can have a data breach. We just need to recognize that fact and actually start to take steps to protect ourselves better. No sector is immune. That's essentially what I'm saying, and we're all potential targets. Quite often, the cyber criminal isn't targeting an individual. What they're actually targeting is everybody. They're spreading their nets far and wide, and they just are simply looking for organizations who haven't taken keen steps to protect themselves. And those steps, we are going to talk about some of those steps throughout this presentation. But essentially, what we need to think is we could be a victim. So we need to get out of the mindset of cyber criminals aren't targeting me, because I'm sorry to say they aren't targeting you personally, but they are absolutely targeting organizations who are complacent and who have taken their eye off the ball around cybersecurity and data protection. And the reason for that is, well, quite often, as I said, these attacks are random, and it's aimed at devices, and they're aimed at those people who haven't or aren't prepared. They are attacking, you know, the devices that we're using, that we're putting in our homes, and this, as it's known as the attack surface, is just getting bigger. The Internet of Things, the IoT that you may have heard about, connected devices, the number of connected devices is just going up all the time. As you can see here, 30 billion devices expected to be in place this year. And that number is only ever increasing. It's set to rise to 30 billion in just 2 years from now. Just think about what businesses was like 5 years ago. Think about your homes 5 years ago. Did you have IoT devices in your home? Possibly not. But now everything from fridges and ovens to the cars we drive and the CCTV we put in our homes and workplaces, you know, these are more often than not now being connected to the internet to create this mesh, this Internet of Things that we're living in. Essentially, we're living in a world of devices, and we are increasingly reliant on these devices to help us on our day-to-day lives. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, like I said, you know, except if we forget that there are bad people out there looking to exploit our complacency and our ignorance, then that's not a great place to be. So here's one practical step I'm just going to ask you to take. So one actionable thing you can do today is just think about your business, think about your homes, look around you. How many devices do you have in your home that are connected to the internet? You know, Some of you will have various different game consoles. You might have one in 2 or 3 different rooms. You might have these personal assistants, the Googles and Alexas in your homes. You might have got these devices that allow you to, ring the doorbell and you can see who it is ringing the doorbell. Think of those devices and then ask yourself a simple question. How have you connected these things to the internet? And have you thought about the security that is in place? Because sadly, there's bad people out there who are thinking about these things all the time and wondering how they can exploit us. Simply searching the internet for unsecured devices. And they sit in the middle of that network picture that we see there, and they are just simply spreading their net far and wide to see who they can bring in. But who are these bad guys? Well, it's a good question. I think what we need to recognize before we get into sort of who these people are, I think it's worth just spending a moment or two just thinking about what they're actually doing. Cybercrime is big business, make no bones about it. In truth, cybercrime has simply evolved. I prefer it to call it crime 2.0. It's gone online, it's had an upgrade. In fact, actual fact, there are only 2 kinds of cybercrime, but there are many forms of ways to exploit these crimes. There are computer-enabled crime, and there is computer-dependent crime. Computer-enabled crime, you'll recognize some of these things. These things have been around us since the dawn of time. Everything from theft and fraud through to money laundering and blackmail and ransom. These are the kinds of things that have been around for a very long time. It's just that the attack surface, the number of devices that are out there, these allow us to be able to, or the cyber criminals, to exploit us. They can do it in greater numbers. So instead of defrauding one person, they can defraud thousands of people, millions of people perhaps. Instead of blackmailing one person, they can do it to many multiples of thousands of people. And of course, we've got computer-dependent crime, which is these things that require a computer to be involved in order for these crimes to be committed. Hacking, ransomware that we'll have heard of, where cyber criminals will get onto your computer and wrap it up. It will encrypt your hard drive, encrypt all the information that you have access to, and may then blackmail you before they release it. Or they may blackmail you before they actually say, if you don't pay these amounts of money, we're going to tell your customers and your clients that you have been hacked and that we have stolen all of this money. So these crimes are increasing. And so therefore, it's not a surprise to me when I hear things such as this, that 50% of all crime is now cyber related. In fact, Accenture last year completed a study that stated the cost of cybercrime is set to reach around $6 trillion by 2021. That's both in the cost of cleanup and the cost of protection as well. And that was before COVID-19, which I'm going to come on to in a second. But we're seeing breaches like this happening on a weekly basis, almost on a daily basis. Again, another action on you, another thing you can do today is just go to Google or any other search engine and just type in the words data breach, and then take a look at the news. See who's had a data breach. Excuse me. Who's had a data breach in the last week, in the last couple of days? The breaches that are before you now occurred just last week. 170,000 customers' personal data being exposed, 600,000 users, 14 million users by Keyring. Interestingly, Keyring, if you take a look at that company, they don't operate within Europe. Why don't they operate within Europe? Because they can't comply with GDPR regulation, which for me speaks volumes. So that tells me that they're not doing the basics to actually meet the requirements of a law that is there to protect you and I. So we're seeing these on an ever increasing basis. And all these companies now face major risks to their reputation, to their value, their financial stability, and ultimately perhaps even facing legal action too. And as I've already said, you know, sadly, in this current climate, things just aren't getting any easier. Coronavirus has forced us and forced many of us to work in ways that we weren't doing 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. It's forcing us to do different things. And since January this year, because remembering that coronavirus was first reported on the 31st of December 2019, that's when it first really hit the headlines. Since January, a company that tracks cybersecurity events and reports on these have stated that they've been tracking an increase in malicious activity focused very squarely on coronavirus. 500,000 messages have been sent, 300,000 messages, malware with URLs, and malicious attachments, 200,000. And they've recognized that there's 140 active email campaigns focused very much squarely around coronavirus. So receiving emails from your banks offering various different relief strategies, from the government offering the similar sorts of things for businesses. They recognize, the bad guys recognize that people are now working remotely, working from home, so not so easy can they go and check. Can you go and check that the email that you've just received is genuine? We're seeing them coming through from the from shops and from stores saying that you've been moved up in the queue so that you can get your groceries earlier. To put it bluntly, cyber criminals trade in fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if there is ever a period where we've all had fear, uncertainty, and doubt thrust upon us, it's right now. So cyber criminals are absolutely actively targeting this particular tragedy, and we need to all be very much aware of it. Now, Action Fraud, the organization, the police, part of the police force that is there to advise and protect around cybersecurity or cybercrime, and more importantly, are there to investigate it. So if you have a cyber attack, then you are meant to speak to Action Fraud. And Action Fraud themselves have reported in the last month a 400% increase in malicious emails and reported crimes through to them. Now, it's really worrying because those reports that are sent through to Action Fraud, a couple of things are really key here. One is to know that cyber criminals aren't just targeting businesses, they are targeting the healthcare sector. They are actively targeting hospitals. So I'll leave that for a second for that to sink in. So when people say to me, I don't think they will target me because I'm a charity, or I don't think they will target me because I'm small, my response to that is that you're thinking about these people as if they have the same moral code as you do. Unfortunately, they don't. These people are attacking hospitals, and they're attacking businesses. The reports that have come through to Action Fraud accumulate up to an accounted £240,000 of total losses. The single highest one of those was for 105,000, and that was for a mandate fraud, where the cyber criminals used the coronavirus as a reason for requesting payment to be made to an alternative bank account. So attacks grow, so as attacks grow, more pervasive and sophisticated, we just need to all recognize that there's never been a better time to start to educate your teams around cybersecurity, make them aware of what's actually happening. Let them watch this webinar. This will be a great thing to raise awareness in your teams about the importance of understanding cybersecurity, which I'll come on to shortly. Because to put it bluntly, cyber attacks can ruin a business's reputation. It can cost you clients, your customers, it can cost you your suppliers, and obviously, ultimately results in lost revenue and earnings. So when people say to me, I don't know if right now I can invest in cybersecurity, my response to that is, sadly, there has never been a more important time for you to invest in cybersecurity. Because these attacks are coming thick and fast, but to the central question, who is carrying out these crimes? Who is it who's targeting us? Well, it can come from many different sources. What I will say to you is it's not just people wearing hoodies sat in the basement. If you've seen Mr. Robot or any other hacking movie or film about hacking, you'll have seen that that image that, you know, this lone worker sat somewhere, and that's still true to some extent. You know, hackers are out there. There are hackers for hire. So cyber criminals aren't always hackers, and hackers aren't always cyber criminals. Cyber criminals are motivated perhaps by many different things. It might not always be money. Cyber criminals, hacktivists, insiders, state-sponsored attacks. You know, these are all the people who carry out these sorts of crimes. Cyber criminals, as I've said, might not be motivated by money. It may be that they are motivated by revenge. It might also be if they are turning into potentially into hacktivists. These are people who aren't so much motivated by money other than to damage you and your revenue stream, but they're normally motivated because of some belief in some ideology that your organization either supports or appears to support. Insider threats, of course, these can be malicious, accidental, or negligent. And in this time of furloughed staff, one of the questions we've got to ask ourselves is, are we creating even more disgruntled employees, and therefore ultimately we're creating more insider threats? So how do you manage insider threats? How are you looking at your staff who are currently perhaps being furloughed, who are being left alone? Are you communicating often enough with them? So in order to manage that kind of risk, you need to look broader than IT, which we'll come on to shortly. But you do need to consider, for that particular risk in particular, consider security incidents. So do you know how many security incidents you've had, how many breaches you've had, how many people are going through disciplinaries at this point in time? So processes around reporting of incidents and events and how you onboard and remove people from the business, all of these things are really important. And they fall into a good level of due diligence or gap analysis, which is really where we move into some real practical steps now, some actionable measures you can take to better prepare or protect your business right here, right now. So how do we go about finding these and closing these gaps, more importantly? Well, the thing that we always say is that the first step is to understand where you are today, what your current situation is, because ultimately you can't protect what you don't understand. So you need to start to look at what good security is. Now, don't make the mistake of focusing purely on IT. This is not just an IT issue. This is a business risk. So therefore, your gaze must be much wider than just looking at one department. You can't simply go to the IT team, the IT crowd, and simply say, this is cybersecurity, fix it. That's like going to your finance department and simply saying, save us money, and then you all go out and do whatever you want. That's just not fair, it's not practical, and it's never going to work. So you should be focusing on the gaps in your knowledge surrounding a number of areas. And we're going to talk about a couple of those areas now, just so you can have an idea of different approaches to this gap analysis. Because you can't be just looking at IT, you need to be looking at the gaps that are in a number of different places. Everything from people to premises to the policies you have, processes, PCs, and providers. So for people, for instance, you know, what training is in place around data protection? What background checks are carried out on your employees? If you use this one slide, you can start to brainstorm, start to ask questions about these key areas. Your premises, how are these being physically protected? How are your physical assets being protected? What locks do you have in place? CCTV. Who's monitoring the CCTV when you're not there? What happens to the physical media? So documents, paper. So premises isn't just about building, it's about the physicality of security. So what data protection policies do you have in place? What rules have you set out that actually say to your staff, these are the things you can and the things you cannot do whilst working remotely? Have you communicated that? Is there a process for handling subject access requests from a data protection perspective? Do you have a business continuity plan? And it's now the time to start to look at that. And of course, with that processes, if there was a security incident or an event right now, if one of your staff sat at home, had a security alert, maybe they click on a link that they shouldn't do, would they know who to speak to? Do they know the process for reporting that through to a central place? And of course, traditionally, gap analysis would focus on PCs and such, but, you know, and absolutely should be factored in, but you need to be asking questions about where your data actually sits. You know, we need to get our heads out of the cloud. You know, we can't just point at the sky and say our data's on the cloud. Cloud just simply means somebody else's computer. So where is the data center? How is it being protected? Who's protecting it? Which brings us neatly onto your providers. So if you outsource your data security or you're putting your data on a cloud, well, where is it? And what credentials does that organization have to protect it? And are they doing a good job right now? Have you reached out to them? Have you spoken to them? Do they have a security standard in place, like ISO 27001, which is another great standard that you yourself can use as a gap analysis tool. So for those who want to really be more expansive around a gap analysis, you can use each one of these 14 areas to consider or to look at your organization and say, how comfortable that I am or we are around our asset management. Do we know what assets we have, where they're sitting, both physical and virtual? What about our physical and environmental security? What about our supplier relationships? Have we reached out to them in these current uncertain times to make sure that they are doing what they should be doing to support us? And is there anything that you can work with them perhaps to actually improve your security and improve your relationships with them? Of course, you've got security incident management, which is a part of this. So you've got a whole range of different aspects of security, not just purely focusing on the technical aspects as well. But if you're looking at that and thinking, that looks way too complex for me, and it is very thorough, it is very detailed. There's 114 controls that you can consider under these 14 different areas. But if you're saying that that is too complicated, then I would ask you to focus on a brilliant regulation. It's an outcome-focused regulation, and that is good old GDPR. So the General Data Protection Regulation sets out a number of principles that an organization has to put in place, which then allows it to be able to operate effectively and operate within the bounds of legality. So what I would say to you is ask yourself, again, today, it can be an action on you, it can be an action on your teams. Ask yourself about these 6 principles. How are we complying with these principles? What are we doing to continually improve our approach to data protection? Once you've asked those questions, you know, do the answers to each of these make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? If you can't answer these questions right here, right now, then when will you be able to answer these questions? Because you need to remember also that there is a 7th principle. It's called the principle of accountability. And this is referring to the fact that someone is in your organization is ultimately accountable for data protection and cybersecurity. Indeed, that might even be you on this call, on this webinar. But what you need to do is look at this as a outcome-focused regulation. So it's not saying you have to do these things, whereas ISO 27001 gives you a set of controls that say you must consider these controls and then decide whether you're going to implement them or not. What GDPR simply says is you will do these things. You will ensure that you are retaining data for only as long as necessary. Well, you have to determine how you're actually doing that. So for now, that's your number one action if you like, to go away and perform a gap analysis. Obviously, if you're struggling and need more help, then hopefully some of the following steps that we'll follow through now, will help. If not, please reach out and ask me, ask George, ask us, and we'll give you some further guidance. So we're going to look at these 5 steps that we're going to go through now, 5 practical things that you can do today that will protect your business going forward. The first one is to develop a clear set of objectives and a strategy. Now, you can't get to where you need to be unless you know what it is, where you want to be. So having a clear objective about what your security looks like or will look like in the future is really important. But all I will say to you is, if you say we've got a strategy and it looks something like that, then you're doing it wrong. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be complex sometimes, but it doesn't need to be complicated. In fact, the UK government have set their own initiative. It's the National Cybersecurity Strategy from published in 2016 that takes us up until next year. And this strategy itself is to defend, deter, and develop. Now, that simply means that they are making the UK, the defences around the UK and UK businesses much tighter. How they're going to do that? Well, that's the devil in the detail. They'll also deter cyber criminals by making us a difficult place to operate in. And ultimately, they're looking to develop the skills and capabilities of organizations and indeed the country to be better cyber secure. Now, funnily enough, Cyberfort ourselves, we have a very similar approach to this. We have developed our plans, our people, and our processes. So what you need to do is to write some clear plans and policies to ensure people understand how to keep you safe. You need to have your people engaged, and you need to have processes in place, both technical and non-technical, to protect you. So that's my first sort of task for you, is to start to think about what are you trying to achieve? What is your objective around cybersecurity? And then develop the strategies that allow you to bring those to life. If you're not sure how to do that, well, again, the next step is very simple. Assign some responsibility. Don't make this the job of IT, as I've already said. You need to assign the review of your business to someone who understands cybersecurity and data protection and the difference between them. If somebody can't describe the difference between cybersecurity and data protection, then they are not the right person to be leading this particular discipline. As I've said, it's often fallen to the IT guy to do it, and I'm sure it will be done to by a highly skilled and knowledgeable person who understands technology. But will they understand regulatory landscape? Will they understand the physical elements of cybersecurity? Will they understand the people side of it? So my advice here is to remember that your company, working remotely. They're working away from the office space. So how are they being protected? How are you ensuring that they are doing the right things? It could be that children are sat at home right now using the devices that you have paid for and given to your staff because the parents just need 5 minutes peace. So they hand the child the computer. Have you thought about that? Is that a new risk that you need to think about? Because the next step is simply that, to carry out a risk review. Ask yourselves, what new risks are present now that people are working remotely? What can you do about it? Are you having to relax rules around data protection? If so, which rules? I have heard that people have said that the ICO are going to be more lenient during these periods of stress and strain on businesses. And therefore, we're not going to get fined if we have a data breach. I'm here to tell you now, categorically, that is wrong. What the ICO have said is, yes, they will relax some of the rules around GDPR, but that is principally around the processes involved within the GDPR. So, for instance, if there is a security breach, you are duty bound, if there is a likelihood to be a risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals, to inform the ICO within 72 hours and to inform data subjects without undue delay. If you breach those now, the ICO is saying that they will be a little bit more relaxed with you. They will understand that you've got your attention is drawn elsewhere, and perhaps reporting lines aren't as fluid as they once were. But does it mean that they won't fine you and that they won't sanction you if you have a data breach? Absolutely not. They will take into consideration the size and complexity of your organization, and they will ask themselves what you could have done to prevent this from happening. And then once it had happened, what did you do to actually reduce the impact on data subjects? So you need to think about risk right here and right now, because there's no such thing as 100% secure. So when you're starting to think about these things, you need to think about maybe running a risk workshop. Again, we're all working remotely at this point in time. So there's never been a more important time to communicate to your teams and maybe get everybody together to do something as fun as run a risk review workshop and ask yourself some of these really detailed questions, or some very honest searching questions. But you do need to engage with your team. You need to train your people, because although many people in cybersecurity say that people are your weakest link, I prefer to think of them as your greatest asset and your greatest form of defense. In fact, they are your first and last form of defense. So of all the things that you could be doing right now, possibly training your staff around cybersecurity is probably the most important, or possibly the most important thing that you could do. Because we're all dispersed, as I've said, and there's an ever increasing risk of data breaches, or falling victim to hackers and cyber criminals. So while everyone is working remotely, you should develop a communication plan, and that's a communication plan for both internal as well as external. So you need to engage with your customers, speak to your customers right now, and again, wrapping a virtual arm around them right here and right now to say, we're still here, we are still operating, we're still working, and we're still protecting your rights and freedoms. We are still protecting your data. As I said, this has probably never been a more important time to do that. And indeed, internally, you need to be confident that if there was a breach, if there was an incident, that people would know what to do. So train your people. Because as I said, this is ultimately the time that they need to know this kind of work. That fear, uncertainty, and doubts, there's only one person or one set of people who can actually remove that, and that's those people on this call right now. So hopefully this presentation will help protect them. I hope it will protect you too, and I hope it will be of some use to you. So finally, this is the best tip I can really give you, and that is to develop a joined up approach to cybersecurity. You need to develop a cybersecurity. If you feel that the previous approach to the gap analysis, or the idea of developing strategies and such, is just too complicated or too fragmented, then yeah, use a standard like Cyber Essentials or ISO 27001, or indeed any of these that are on the screen right now. Because by having a disjointed approach in your approach, you create gaps. And it's these gaps which allow the bad guys in, or allow mistakes to happen. So using different security standards is a great way to close those gaps. But remember that any security standard should be seen as a journey. It's not a destination. Having a greater understanding of cybersecurity after this presentation, hopefully you're already in a better position, remembering that I said to you that the bad guys are out there exploiting our complacency or our ignorance. Good cybersecurity absolutely increases the value of your business and ultimately protects your people, your customers, both now and into the future. That is my presentation. Thank you ever so much for your attention. I hope that was of use. George, I think you can, if you'd like to take yourself off mute right now, and if there have been any questions, it would be great to hear those now.
No, it's been really great, Gary. Thank you very much for your for the webinar. I do have a couple of questions. I did prep this before the session. It was a positive for me because I actually get to see the presentation before. So yeah, I'll come prepared. So yeah, guys, if you do have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A, and I'll read them out, and hopefully Gary can then answer. Just a quick one from me, Gary. Obviously, with us all working from home, you've mentioned the review of people's processes, the policies, the premise, and all that sort of stuff. Is there a sort of a negative side to that in terms of working remotely? Because the premise side of things, people are going to have to leave the house. And is there a way around that? Is there something that we can do to overcome that?
When you say, is there a way to overcome it? I mean, people, yeah. One of the ways to protect against that is, again, have clear policies and rules. You know, policy is just a statement of fact. People how they should operate in a remote environment. So you you can if for instance your industry, your sector is very paper based, then you should be explaining to people about what they should be doing with paper in much the same way as you would with an office. That is, you know, it's a clear desk policy. Whatever that desk is, whether it's the sofa or whether it's the dining room table or whatever. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a designated area. So there's going to be kids running around, there'll be pets running around, and all of those additional risks that are there now. So physically securing paper is really important, and file. Explaining to people that you know if you're going to have client meetings and webinars, you are inviting people into your home. And I've run a number of where I've had other people where I can see their office space, and I can see files behind them, I can see client names, I can see information in their office that perhaps, you know, if I'd gone to their actual physical office, I wouldn't have seen. So thinking about the physical world in which you live in is probably the best way that you can do that. So as you rightly say, you can't control things now because everyone's working remotely. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Does anyone? I'm looking at the chat now and the Q&A. There's not anything on there.
Okay.
So yeah, just wondering if anyone does have any final comments, any views, questions. I think silence is a good thing, Gary. I think you covered it.
Yes, well, as my old maths teacher once said to me, having no questions on there, you know, that either shows that you understood everything or you understood nothing. Let's hope it's the former. But hopefully that has been helpful for everyone. If there are any questions that you know occur to anyone following this, obviously we will get in touch, and we will let you know. Oh, hang on a second. So we have had a question on here. So lots of people are using Zoom for video calls. I've read that Zoom is not secure, and that there have been Zoom bombings and other issues. Do you have any advice for us? Yes, no, it's a really good question. What I will say is that I'm not a Zoom platform expert. And what I would say is that all platforms, irrespective of which platform you wish to use, will have some form of drawback to them. You should really, with Zoom, they are doing a lot of work right now to improve some of their security settings and such, and educate people. There have been problems. I've seen some really good work coming out from them recently. But yes, you know, Zoom bombings are occurring. So advice, if you are doing a Zoom meeting, you can, for instance, as soon as the meeting starts, you can lock it down so that other people can't join it. You can require passwords to come onto it now and force people in there. You can automatically mute people. But I would always suggest that Zoom, like any platform, is there's no such thing as 100% secure, as I've already mentioned, and it's about how appropriate is it to have that conversation using Zoom. So, for instance, at the moment, I am categorically saying to a number of therapists and therapist governing bodies that these governing bodies have 20,000 members, and they are actively telling their therapists to go online, that provision of health comes first and security second. And I am categorically saying to those people, you should not be doing therapy using Zoom because of the security implications around it. And this all comes down to metadata and where the data is stored and the information being stored on cloud, if it's been recorded, etc. And the fact that Zoom has done a number of things around creating shadow accounts. So there's a number of privacy issues, not just cybersecurity issues. It's about privacy. So if you are having a very private conversation, something very, very sensitive, I would not be using platforms like Zoom because it's a commercial tool. If you are discussing the latest Chinook helicopter designs, or if you're holding cabinet meetings, I would say it's probably not the best thing to do using Zoom. There are other methods that are out there which have different forms of encryption and are more secure. One such system is called Wire, for instance. It's just not as intuitive and as simple to use as Zoom. But I do know a lot of cybersecurity consultants and practitioners like myself use it because of the security surrounding it. That's a long answer to a short question. Is Zoom secure? Nothing's 100% secure. I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Any more questions, guys? People frantically typing, or they're not, Gary.
Well, that's fine. As you said at the outset, you know, I hope everyone is working safely, and I hope you know the presentation has given people some strategies now to go away and think about how they can better protect their businesses, because as I've already said several times, the cyber criminals are not going light on any one of us. This is just part of their business model. They've always capitalized on major crises and disasters. Everything from the bushfires last year, where they set up fake charity websites where people donate, to asking for donations and such. They exploit the things, the people's you know, emotions. You know, people want to be charitable, people want to help in those times of difficulty, and cyber criminals just recognize that there's money to be made through that. So sadly, that's the world in which we live, and we just need to recognize that fact and do all that we can to protect us. As I said, this is not a time for taking our foot off the gas around cybersecurity and data protection. If there was ever a time you needed to focus on this topic, it is right now.
Yeah, and just a closing comment from me then, Gary. You said at the very start that this is the first step of people actually taking action in terms of a good cybersecurity practice. So with this being recorded, I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of this in the link. I'll work with Jenna Bryant, and yeah, we'll circulate this out. And if you do want to circulate this internally as to your organisation, then ultimately we're sort of spreading our message out there, and you as an organisation can become more cyber aware and more cyber secure. So
yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think I would also say that some people on this call may say, well, we're already ISO 27001, so that's great. Well, if you are, then fantastic. Use this as part of your evidence that you are doing training and awareness under, you know, Section 7 of the controls that are required. It requires you to do regular training and awareness. Use this as evidence. Send it out to your teams. get them to actually watch it and ask their questions and any thoughts, any concerns that they have, any changes in behavior. So that's what you need to do. It's about changing behavior right now. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, George. So yeah, I hope people will take us up on that.
Great stuff. That's all from me, Gary. I really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time.